The lines are open 011-542-2186 at ANN7 TV on Twitter, or my personal one at I am Cindy Mabin. Joining us live in studio, Mosiri Tsiane is the chairperson of the South African Liberty Foundation. Professor Sipho Siepe and Botsang Muilwa, political analyst, will also be joined on the line by Colin Maine, ANC Youth League president, and General Bantu Olomisa, UDM leader, and Reverend Kenneth Meshwe, president of the ACDP. We'll start in studio. Good evening to you, gentlemen. I mean, what an eventful start to the week. But you almost feel like, you can't wait to respond and try and articulate what exactly is going on amidst all the theories and conspiracies we're hearing.
Good evening, Cindy, to you and fellow panelists and your viewers. Well, I don't think I'm anxious to respond. You know, these stories, my heart can't take this anymore. I'm tired of the speculations.
9/12, eh?
But I must say, there has been speculations on the pipeline whether there's a cabinet reshuffle coming or not. And after I've paid my attention, you know, the whole day to this process, this is the closest we are to a cabinet reshuffle. And I will explain to you and your viewers why. The minister and the team and the deputy traveling on this road show, it was an authorized trip by the president, so we cannot assume that the presidency did not know of the trip because that's a government business. That's the first part. The second part is the issue of the court case tomorrow with Oak Bay, where the Minister of Finance has been cited to, or is also one of the respondents. It is a scheduled court appearance, so we cannot say they did not know about it. It leaves the nation, it leaves the media and speculators to say the only reason the president has called the minister to come back is it's a possible cabinet reshuffle. But I've also learned, to fuel that, I've also learned late this afternoon that actually it seems, and I don't have material evidence to that yet, the Minister of Defense was also abroad, and she has also been requested to come home, which actually fuels more the speculation that the president wants his executive at home when he makes critical decisions. But Cindy, lastly, we should not forget that earlier this morning, the Oak Bay legal representative made a presentation to demand that the Minister of Finance should be present when the case is here tomorrow. Late this afternoon, the presidency made a request and an application that the presidency, not the president as a person, but the president representing the country, they would like to have a say in the matter between the banks and Oak Bay. Between the banks and Oak Bay, on the basis that Standard Bank of South Africa has made in their application clear that they don't want the presidency as well as the cabinet to be involved. Yet, they are not opposing the presence of the Minister of Finance in this instance. So that could be the other reason. But for me, if I look at all the facts presented on the table, we are heading for a cabinet reshuffle. Is
it a war for attrition, as it's been told, that this is a systematic attack on Pravin Gordhan to wear him down to a point where he simply would either have to go, or in a speculation would have it that he may be recalled?
Well, I think, first of all, the president does, from time to time, summon ministers in the country. So there's nothing unusual about summoning ministers. And what we should be asking is what had happened between last week when the president authorized the trip and changing his mind. And it is possible that you may have this court case that is coming in, or there may be other information that has emerged. But what is of bothersome to, and should be bothersome to South Africans, is when a president begins to function within the constitutional constraints, where the president can say, the people that I have deployed, I would like to see you. Then we end up with the economic turbulence. That begins to say there's something wrong with our economy. And secondly, I think part of it is also because South Africans like to create demigods. They like to create scapegoats. When Trevor Manuel was a Minister of Finance, and when he went to Washington, and it was during the transition between Kgalema Motlanthe and Mbeki, there was speculation that he might not serve, and suddenly the rent went down, and I think they say we lost about 200 billion in one day. But the truth of the matter is, later when he was removed and not appointed, we were it was calm. The rand did not even move. Actually, some even said it became better. So we seem to be victims to the markets, where they are going to whip us into line. And I think as a people, we should be concerned about our sovereignty, where a president cannot, if we think a president should not have those powers, then we must change our constitution. But it becomes a problem that when somebody acts within the powers that are there in the constitution, then our economy begins to be threatened, and some people begin to start. Actually, part of it is that we are part of that, but we get so excited, and some people want to see the collapse of this country so that they can continue to either find a scapegoat, find a hero, and all that. I think we should be focusing on policies, we should be focusing on institutions, rather than to seek messiahs for the country.
Yeah, but how do you explain the 50 billion rand that was lost in that dreadful 9/12, as it's become known, in 2015, when Tlantla, then minister, was recalled, and we saw the whole disastrous performance in the markets?
Yeah, but that is the point that one is making, that if a president acts in a particular way, we need to have strong institutions. I mean, you can look at what Trump is doing. He can say whatever he likes, but because the economy is strong, it doesn't matter. And also people, you see, we have this Armageddon complex, that once something goes amiss, then there's a collapse of the country, because we are a very negative people, and as a result we send the wrong signals. We don't send signals that says our institutions are strong, and we need to build the institutions. We need to come up with policies. We cannot have situations where one person, or whether it's a president, whether it's a minister of finance, whether it's another minister, that their actions and missteps begins to cost us so much.
Yeah, let's look at the genesis before we even get to where we are at the moment. There was that awkwardness and many opportunities where ministers, including a finance minister, had shown a vote of no confidence. Even if they hadn't voted in the parliamentary exercise, they decided to walk away. Minister Hanekom, for one, etc., showing that they didn't want to work with President Zuma, or they didn't have confidence in his leadership. Do you think this has brought us to this untenable continuation of that relationship?
Well, one can think it that way, but remember, the person whom South African voted in large, particularly the leader of an organization as in charge of the African National Congress in particular, is the President Jacob Zuma. His cabinet choice becomes his cabinet choice. His reshuffling choice becomes also his choice. That being given also in the Constitution. Now, if you're going to work with people whom are not going to support you, surely you have the liberty to make sure that you can reshuffle at any time. But be that as it may, the key factor here is South Africans, or what is in the best interest of South Africa. In his opening speech in the SONA that he gave, the key factor that the president has been rather saying more than any other thing is the radical transformation of our economy, our so-called socio-economic transformation. That's what we're looking forward to. You need ministers that are going to inject in that direction. You need ministers that are going to be part and parcel of that. Now, the noise that is being made about one, as my colleague would say, a super minister, it's really not in the best interest of South Africa, but rather in the best interest of either the companies that he's having an interest in. Thus, you would have the rand. When you touch him, you'll have a rand that is always affected. But this trend of ministers having interest in our banks, it's not the first finance minister to be seen to be part and participating in that. You also had the previous minister. When he leaves, suddenly his wife and himself are having huge investment in this other capital injections that are there, our private sector more in particular, in the banks.
All right, let's get a reaction now from General Bantu Olomisa, UDM leader, and Reverend Kenneth Mishwe, president of the ACDP. General Olomisa, thanks so much for your time. Good evening to you. What do you make, or what's your assessment of the situation?
Good evening, and good evening to the panelists. You want us to be sangomas now, eh?
Hey, yes, and take us out of our misery. Okay, maybe you have something.
Let's throw the bowls then all over the show. One might tempted to have, let's say, three scenarios to talk about. The scenario one would be that the ANC National Executive Committee members over the past weekend might have revolted against Matabile Dlamini, and that JZ possibly had failed to defend her. At the same time, the anti-Gordhan clique might have demanded that he be removed under the pretext that he did not pronounce on the so-called radical economic transformation in detail in his budget. Then Zuma would have been happy to find, or rather Zuma would have found an opportunity to deal with the issue of Gordhan, which is well documented between those two. Well, such a scenario would give JZ, of course, a chance to reshuffle his cabinet and also accommodate his wife, his ex-wife in the cabinet. Scenario two would be related to the recent Constitutional Court judgment, wherein the courts have said, you continue negotiating with CPS, but whatever you finally agree upon, it has to have the stamp of the National Treasury. And knowing Matabile Dlamini, and she's not organized a minister, she delayed that. And Minister Pravin, this trip might have been organized long before. So they might have decided to leave, thinking that perhaps they can approve the contract electronically, but JZ found an opportunity to say, please come back, let's be together. Lastly, the last scenario would be linked to the banks. We cannot underestimate the sudden emergence or the sudden intervention of President Zuma in the courts. And they might want to compare notes. Maybe there are certain paragraphs in Pravin's papers and those of JZ's papers in the bank's case court tomorrow, which would need to not to be seen to be contradicting one another on the issue. Those are my little contributions to this business of Sangomas.
Yeah, I think it's as clear as mud, General Holomisa, but we also invite Reverend Kenneth Mesha. Good evening to you, and just your reaction to it, especially with the number of scenarios or conspiracies that are playing out, whether this is a case of lack of enough transformation or rather that this is a war of attrition.
Well, good evening, Cindy, and all panelists. From the ACDP side, we are aware that what is currently happening is speculating on what the president is planning to do. There has been a lot of talk about a looming cabinet reshuffle. But having said that, we also must express our disappointment because the nation, particularly young people, are yearning to work. Unemployment in South Africa is increasing by the day, and every opportunity we can get to woo investors to South Africa has to be welcomed. Now that the Minister of Finance and his team were trying to woo investors to our country so that the unemployed could find opportunities to apply for jobs. That, unfortunately, has been hindered because of this sudden recall of an order to the finance minister to come back home. We know that the Minister of Finance is a credible person that we believe is a man of integrity who would not leave the country without permission. Now, if he was given permission to go on this tour and that permission is withdrawn without sound reasons, obviously that raises questions of whether the presidency really wants jobs to be created, really wants investors to come to our country. The other thing that is of concern to us is that a message is being sent to the international community that the fightings and the infightings between the ruling party are now spilling into the public because his being in Europe is known. It was in the papers, it is in the media, so it is known that the finance ministers would be meeting with potential investors. Now, it is possible that people who are from cities that are not London, not in the UK, would have had an interest in this meeting with the finance minister of South Africa and made means to go to London to be part of this meeting. So now that he's been recalled.
Reverend Mishra, I beg your pardon, in the interest of time, I'd like to engage our panelists.
Just one little point, Cindy. I don't understand why would the good reverend insinuate that there was no valid reason to recall the minister from this trip. We do not know. There's definitely a reason that the head of state can recall some of his cabinet. That's one. But two, the president or the recalling of the minister to come home for whatever reason did not stop the business of the day to continue to happen. If he says Pravin is a man of integrity who is liked and who knows his job, what does it say about the deputy minister who has been left to continue with the business of the day and the rest of the South African delegation that accompanied the Minister of Finance to continue the business? Now, that is exactly what Prof was talking about. Our economy and our government processes should not rely on individuals and create demigods whereby if those particular people are not there, the business of the day will not happen.
Professor Siep.
Yeah, actually, that's a very important submission. Investors don't invest because there is an individual. Individuals are always dispensable. They may be involved in accidents, they may be recalled from office and all that. It is the policies and the approach to the economy that ultimately counts. But I'm quite intrigued by the general's interpretation or speculation by the general, which actually brings a bit of sobriety in the whole thing, that it is actually possible that given that there are court cases, that the president, if the government has to make a submission on matters that have to do with money, especially given the SASA, that could be a reasonable explanation. And I don't think just because a minister is recalled from a trip, that it collapses a government. Actually, you do not want to have relationships with investors who are who worship individuals, because that is not sustainable. But we know that countries do not work that way, and also investors do not work that way. So I do think that what we may need to do is really to desist from throwing too many bones, because we'll end up confusing ourselves. But what is clear is that the president has acted within the powers that are within himself, and summoning ministers is not unusual. But what is good is that we see also a minister of finance who appears not to be defined, because when he's called by his boss, he comes back home, and that is actually positive. Okay. And also, most importantly, is that the other members of the delegation are continuing with the job that they're supposed to do. With
the job at hand. General Holomisa, just on the question of the lack of transformation, as some have suggested, we've seen complaints coming from the likes of Commissioner Tom Moyane and even other state-owned entities, including Eskom and Denel, saying that the minister, in a sense, is protecting the old guard of of business and not prioritizing that radical economic transformation. What's your view?
Well, what I don't understand here in these accusations, almost all the people you are mentioning are senior members of the ruling party in one way or another. And they are also sitting at the highest levels like NETLEC. There is NEC, there are ANC policy resolutions. What is not clear is who is indirectly responsible for making sure that these policy positions are integrated into a bigger government policies. Jeff Radebe is sitting in the presidency, but you hardly hear any or most of these cabinet ministers talking, for instance, about the NDP, which had the support of the population. So, in other words, I'm not convinced. They went to Lekgotla. The same Lekgotla should have said to the Minister of Finance, these are the things which we want to appear in your on your budget. Then the minister could have been given an opportunity to address the cabinet in Lekgotla to say, remember, you cannot introduce a radical transformation now because we have a 3-year budget cycle. What you want us to do may appear in the financial year 2018-2019 financial year. But you can't in the midstream and say radical economic transfer. What is that? You don't even define it.
Okay, just please hold on the line, Jonas.
You know, Cindy, I wanted to talk about the exchange rate and the rent dropping, but General has, activated something in me. Once you start putting the word radical, it cannot be business as usual. If the African National Congress, NEC or Lekgotla resolved that they are going to go the radical way of doing things, he is right when he says they are supposed to be presented not only to the Minister of Finance, but to the whole economic cluster to say, this has been business of the day for the last 20 years. It is not working according to our findings. Now let us put these resolutions, which did not come in 2017, by the way. This radical economic transformation, if you look at the resolutions of the ANC in 2012, they are found into that, conference and workshop documents. But now what I wanted to bring to the table was, everybody is talking and speculating about the rand being dependent on the Minister of Finance. When the rand has been dropping all along for the last few months, from 15 to 12, nobody articulated that to the Minister of Finance. Nobody gave credit. It's the rand has been performing. Now, suddenly, it was actually very low this morning, and people were saying it's because of Donald Trump. It dropped this afternoon, and people are saying it's because of the statement that was issued. It is wrong when the currency of a country is dependent on an individual. It cannot be right. But also, let us remember that actually our rand, honestly speaking, it's forex, it's fake, it's wrong, because we know where we are sitting, that the Competition Commission of this country had found banks to have colluded in pricing the rand. Now, we cannot trust what the markets are telling us or the economists to say the rand fluctuations are dependent on who is sitting on which position at Treasury, when we all know that where we are sitting actually, the government and the ministers and the executive do not have control, even the Reserve Bank, over the rand. The financial markets controlled by the financial institutions, which are found to be corrupt, which are found to be colluding, have been controlling the rand. What has changed in the last 2 months? The findings were 2 months ago. And now we want to say, oh no, then the rent is okay, the minister is stable, the president is not reshuffling. Are we putting behind our backs the fact that the banks were colluding since 2007 until today to can put price fixing on the rent?
We live by faith, and we hope for the best and prepare for the worst, regardless of what the outcome is going to be. But Mosiri, with the cabinet reshuffle, whether it will backfire on Zuma, who didn't make this supposed decision in isolation, and especially when it comes to the support that the Minister of Finance enjoys in cabinet, especially.
Well, as chairperson of SALF, we would really love to have that minister out there. Should be out. We don't mince our words. In actual fact, we believe that he is not serving the best interests of South Africa, but rather serving the best interest of white monopoly. Simple and straightforward. His interest and his investments are squarely within those banks, the Bidvest that he's controlling. There's a lot of things that he's got shares in. His interest is in his shares. In actual fact, he serves his personal interest and furthermore, the interests of those that were in charge of the economy. We will not have South Africa improve economically if the majority of this country are not without participation in the economy. As far as the black people of South Africa do not participate in this economy, and majority of us are not participating in this economy will never grow. In actual fact, we'll have people determining what our currency should be from foreign lands.
Reverend Mishra, just your response. I hope you are privy to the discussion so far, and that this cumulative inclusion into the economy is not enough. We need radical change, and there has been others calling for a Minister of Finance, Gordhan, to be replaced.
Maybe I need to firstly comment on the response of the panelists to what I said. I definitely agree with them that the economy should not depend on one individual. I totally agree. But where I might have been misunderstood is that when you have a conference and you have a speaker that people know his reputation, people know his skills, people know that when this person was in charge, that there was an economic stability, particularly when we face the danger of being downgraded. He went overseas again and he met with investors and he spoke with people that had an interest in the South African economy, what was happening in South Africa. And because of his efforts, we believe, his contribution, we believe we managed to avoid a downgrade. So the issue of one man, the economy depending on one man, is something that we do not believe, that I do not believe. But the fact is he was announced as a person who was going to interact and also a person that was going to address the concerns of those who have not yet come into the country and also tell them what would be the benefits of them coming to the country. So that is the point that I was trying to make. And then about the president not having a good reason. I understand that obviously there must be a reason for the president to make such a recall. But normally, when you have such a drastic step, because I say it's a drastic step, because you are allowed to go, and if there's an emergency, you're told, come home, please, because of this and this and this and this. If relations are good, that is what normally should have happened. Transformation has to take place. Indeed, the economy has to be shared among all the people of South Africa. Opportunities must be shared with all the people of South Africa. The economy should not be in the hands of a few people. We believe that much has to be done to ensure that the poorest of the poor and also the black marginalized people and those in the middle class in particular will also have the stake in also running the economy of the country.
All right, please stay on the line, Reverend Mishra. General Holomisa, just with the, again, the criticism of Gordhan or Treasury, including the finance cluster, hindering the advancement of black business. We've seen it with many submissions made, not only state-owned entities, but even colleagues in cabinet, that funding is not allocated properly or money dries up, and even legislation with the triple PFA, etc., still keeping black people out of the economy. Why is it that these are not necessarily ventilated enough to argue the other side of the coin with regards to a finance minister's position and what he's done for transformation?
Here we need to focus on the leadership of the ruling party collectively. Since 1994, they have been changing policies to say this one is going to work, that one is not going to work, and so on. It's the same mess in the Department of Education. Whenever there's a new Minister of Education, he goes overseas, go and collect some syllabuses which are lying in the dustbins of those countries and want to impose on us. So in the field of economy, we must not lie to ourselves. in the last 22 years, we have never reached a consensus on what kind of macroeconomic policy do we need in this country. Until we have addressed that, we will never be able to address all these backlogs and imbalances. If we are talking about the need for the state to do more, we would have to list the areas where we want state intervention. If in the past, if you were to accuse the National Party of being a hardline socialist, maybe they would have detained you. But in practical, in practice, they were implementing a socialist policy, albeit under separate development. As a result of those backlogs and gaps, the ruling party needs to sit down, if it need be, to include the entire society of South Africa. Remember, we are in this quagmire because ANC, during negotiations, chose to focus on getting political freedom, not economic freedom. They said we'll address that later. Where are we now?
Just hold on, please, General Holomisa.
Yeah, I think there's the point that the general makes, which is actually a good one. You know, the tendency to blame one person when you have a collective of ministers, when you have the NEC, when you have the alliance partners, really, it actually reflects more of those who are complaining. Even Pravin Gordhan was a problem. Then that entire grouping, army of people and organization should be able to ask him to step aside. So that can be the reason. And secondly, we must also understand that the ANC itself is a contested space where you have different ideological streams that are contesting for power.
Okay.
So the failure cannot be on one person. So what we need to do when it comes to radical economic transformation, even when you look at the measures that the ANC has come up with, those measures could have been introduced much earlier. But part of it has been, well, maybe you should grant them that maybe we are experimenting, because that's what democracy is. We try something, and when it fails, we try something else. But where the general is correct is that we seem to be trying measures and policies that had failed elsewhere. But part of it has to do with the fact that we have no confidence in ourselves. Anything that comes from abroad is great. And when we talk about abroad, we're talking about the English-speaking spaces, talking about Europe, we're talking about the US. We don't talk about the rest of the world, the East and all that. Maybe right now, at least the ANC has done something to try to redefine what it can do internally. For instance, the policy that says 30% of the mega projects, 30% of it must go to black business. That is a step in the right direction. We can quibble whether 30% is sufficient, but the ANC could still have done that some time back.
You know, Cindy, in support actually of what General and Prof have said, I've always maintained that for an organization to grow and to be sustainable and to govern properly, you should know where you come from. The reason General today is standing and saying the ANC has been changing its policies over and over years, it is because right at the beginning, they dropped the ball. They dropped what they existed for as a liberation movement that was not transformed into government. And they focused on being in a political power without economic power. But if we recall the foundation and the formulation of the ANC in 1912, the fundamental principle of the forming of the ANC as a liberation movement was the question of the return of the land to the African people, which includes all other things. It includes being self-governing. It includes being economically empowered as a nation. And that did not happen. We focused on actually looking at the crumbs that were left by the white monopoly capital and the apartheid government. And I think that's where things went wrong. But in addition to the changes that Prof is referring to, we should defocus on actually the former colonizers and the imperialists and say, right now we said our focus is Africa. Right now we said we are members of BRICS, previously of IPSA, and we should be looking at, do we want to woo investors from the same people who have created problems for us? Yeah. Do we still want to go to London in New York and Washington to talk to investors who have betrayed this country, investors who have colluded to can weaken the economy and the currency of this country and maintained the status quo. Why don't we look elsewhere and focus our efforts and energies on that line? But you also raise an issue of cabinet ministers who are colleagues of Pravin, who had actually complained and raised issues that he is not being cooperative, he is blocking, he's a stumbling block to some of the development initiatives. And I didn't hear us discussing that, to the detail. But I want to say they are actually part of the problem for running to the media and complaining and moaning about this when they can sit inside the ANC, NEC, raise these issues. They can sit inside the cabinet, raise these issues to say, but minister, you are not treading the line according to our programs. Now it becomes a collective. Once you start blaming one individual, when you have said to the world ANC, it's a collective kind of an organization, then they must all take the responsibility of sitting with a stumbling block named Pravin Gordhan.
Yeah, I mean, as the Liberty Foundation, you're saying that you want the minister should go for the very reasons that Botsang cited. But then again, in the court of public opinion, it does seem like it's an unfair attack on him. It is the war of attrition. He's trying, they're trying to weigh him down. He's a virtuous person, etc. So how do you defend your argument in that context?
Well, he's been perceived to be the messiah, the protector of those that are perceived to be corrupt. But in actual fact, he's been the protector of the white monopoly power, simple and straightforward. You see, Pravin is not the all and all not of South Africa. We've had ministers before. How do we radically transform the economy from here henceforth? How do we make sure that black people in general participate in this economy? That's key for us. But I wanted to also respond to the issue of the 20 years, the 5 years since 1994. The ANC has been changing policies and so forth, which shall include also the general, who was part and parcel of that very same ANC in there. So whether it was good for him to be there at that time, he made that very same mistake in making sure that this ANC fails at that time, we do not know. But we need to say, how do we move South Africa from here henceforth? How do we make sure that the notion that has now erupted, which was impossible to talk about radical socio-economic transformation 2 years ago, now that we are able to talk about it, now that we are able to face our demon, now that we have discovered that there's no way South Africa can be powerful without actual active participation of black people, now is the time for us to move forward.
To respond. General Holomisa.
Well, I don't think there is a need to respond to the last commentator. He should be suggesting a way forward, because he seemed to have some ideas as to how to move forward. He mustn't ask it from us.
So he's acting like Mr. Know-it-all. But just before you go, General Holomisa, just very quickly, in just how the reports coming in now, whether Pravin should go or not, we're not sure entirely. But, the fact that his backers as well, if you look at Save SA, the Helen Suzman Foundation, these are generally not organizations that are altruist to a egalitarian society and fighting for the black cause. What does that tell you, just based on the support Pravin is enjoying at the moment?
Well, almost all these institutions you are mentioning, in one way or another, they are part of the ruling party at one stage in their lives. And they will tell you that this is not the ANC we used to know. This is a different ANC. So the mandate of the ANC ends in 2019. And if the ANC doesn't pull up its socks, it's clear that the answers questions which were asked by my panelist here, the last person to address us, just before I spoke, lies with the voters. I think our voters now are well versed with the situations in this country. All what we need to do is just to educate our people to say, when we say we need South Africa, what kind of South Africa we need? We go back to the Constitution. That is the Bible which will guide us. When people disobey court orders, when people violate oath of office, what should we be telling the voters to? And after that, what are we proposing? What kind of a president are we going to have beyond 2019? Will we still have this president who's got so much powers? Will we have these cabinet ministers who have not been screened? And so on and so on. There's a lot of things which needs to be done.
General, please stay on the line. You touched on a number of issues, what some had called the leadership vacuum, but also the soul, or the battle of the soul of the ANC in light of the elective conference coming up.
Yeah, I think the first thing that we must accept as South Africans, and actually we tend to be more despondent. We have a democracy that is working. We have free and fair elections. We have Chapter 9 institutions, we have the courts, and there are times when we do not agree with the courts, and sometimes there are times when we should not agree with the courts. That is also part of being in a democracy. There are some people who hold the view that if you disagree with the judge, then there's something wrong with you. And we know that some judges need to be assisted to think properly. This is why we have a number of appeals where the judgments are overturned. But also the Constitutional Court is not God. And some of us hold the view that they have made mistakes. And some of the former Constitutional Court judges have actually said some of the judgments they've made have not been correct. But there have been also instances where the Constitutional Court members have disagreed with each other about what is actually correct. So we must remove this notion of judges being the superhuman beings. So that's the first thing that we must pick. But what we are saying is that even when we talk about on the economic front, we also know that that which we have tried in the last 20 years has not worked because the majority is outside. And when you look at the voting patterns, you see that you have a new party like the EFF that had done better than some parties. The reason why they've done so is because they've articulated the frustration of many young people. So the ANC is almost responding to that when it comes up with the idea of radical economic transformation. But part of the problem is that it was always responding to the right parties that were more on the right. Now that you have a party that is on the left or far left, it does help to sober up those people who think that it could be business as usual. So you see, for me, I see the maturing and also the multiplicity of parties is really what the ANC stood for, that it was going to create a multi-party democracy. And when some people move out of the ANC should actually celebrate it if those people remain in the political space, because it is what it fought for.
Yeah, I mean, these are some of the questions or observations that you've raised regarding a certain so-called civic rights movements or organizations, your Helen Suzman Foundations, your Right to Know, Freedom Under Law, who nitpick essentially the kind of causes that they want to protect South Africa from. And yet, when it comes to questions around those very individuals that they're protecting, it's very silent, or even socio-economic issues. Is that the argument you're making around Pravin Gordhan's support?
Yes. Surely, you would see that your so-called protectors of the status quo would always come in the fourth and make sure that they protect what is supposed to be theirs. They would not in any way act in the best interest of the other side, who have all the time not having hand a bite in the economy of South Africa. All your so-called Helen Suzman Foundation and so forth, these other foundations have always been there to make sure that there is a protection. Particularly, you'll be surprised that they'll be protecting even this specific minister. Why is there protection for him? Why would there be no interest in making sure that there's a push, a harsh push from that very same or those foundations to say that the economy of South Africa should in actual fact be shared amongst all those that live in it?
Actually, in addition to that, I don't take the so-called foundations serious. They are a creation of people who are supposed to have retired and focus on what the new youth and development will do. A day I will take this, all of this parties serious, is the day they will rise and they say to live in squatter camps, in poverty and in squalor, it's inhuman. It's against the constitution of this country. Therefore, we rise and we want to hold the government of the day. We want to take it to court that people are living in squatter camps. The day these foundations are going to rise and say to the African National Congress government, led by the DA and EFF on the other side, and say to them, we want this skewed form of economy where it is still in line of the apartheid times, where more than 80% of the minority people are owning the land and the minerals and the resources of this country. Can we move away from that? We will take them serious. They shouldn't come only when there's elements of corruption, which is actually racial. The corruption that they are taking to court, the questioning of corrupt politicians and illegal transactions of politicians, they are taking them to court, they are defending, they are dragging the president and everybody else to court. When will they rise and drag the corrupt banks to court? The colluding companies, the cartels of basic things that human beings and black people use in this country, the milk cartel, the bread cartel, we have had the vehicles and the banks. Those are things that are impacting socio-economy of the poor majority of these people. And none of these foundations have ever put an application in court on the best interest of what they claim to be the poor of the poorest. So I'm not taking them serious. I think the ANC should rise as the ruling party in this country, put their policies forward and make sure that their ministers, their MPs are conducting themselves and voting according to their policies, because the policies read very well on paper, but their conduct and behavior as MPs and as cabinet ministers is totally the opposite of what they are claiming and selling to the people during elections. Therefore, they must start picking up their socks, put their foot down and say, we will implement these policies, which were decisions of conferences that were informed by branches that are representing the so-called poor of the poorest. If they don't do that, then we are wasting our time listening to these foundations and retired former politicians who are doing nothing, actually.
We're almost out of time. General Holomisa will give you the second last word. Others are calling it Zuma must take a bold step and recall finance minister. Do you think that would lead to another calamity, as we've seen with the shift of Minister Nene previously?
Well, from national point of view, I would say, JZ, there is no need for him to recall Pravin. But from a political point of view, well, we would appreciate that, because we know that would mean the ANC is fighting amongst itself. So we'll exploit that as opposition party members.
But I mean, on a serious note, when it comes to economic transformation, is that being serious?
No. I don't think, on a serious note, I don't think there is a need to remove Pravin. What ANC should do is they must go back to the drawing boards and support and say, when we talk about a radical transformation, this is what we mean, and who is going to implement that, so that all the state departments are clear. It must not be a one department responsible for that. You are not going to succeed. Even another minister which will be appointed tomorrow is going to fail.
Sure.
Yeah. Thank you so much, General.
Just one point, General. If you look at the proposal from the ANC on this matter, it is suggested that the presidency must be the strategic center. And that's how it should have always been. The minister, when he gives the budget, the Minister of Finance, it should be the president's budget. We should not allow this nonsense that you actually find, that it creates almost two centers of power. There should be one center, and I think if General was running this country, he would have been very decisive. He would have made sure that he acted quite quickly. Unfortunately, he has left the organization that he believed in. But what is most important is that we are in a democracy, and it's an experiment, and changes will happen whether we like them or not. And I think the young people are actually saying this post-1994 narrative of inclusion and the way the inclusion is decided by other people is not going to work for us.
Professor Siape, we're going to have to leave it there, gentlemen, as